Think forward. Think Research Channel.
The opinions expressed in the following program are strictly those of the speakers. They do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Science Foundation.
From the National Science Foundation, where discoveries begin. This is Frontier. Discussions of today's most exciting research subjects by distinguished scientists and engineers working at the frontiers of knowledge. Here now is the director of the National Science Foundation, Dr. Arden Bement.
Hello and welcome to Frontier. There's never been a more exciting time in the history of human endeavor. At the dawn of the 21st century, researchers are at work on some of the most profound questions ever asked. Questions like, what is the nature of matter, space, and time? What are the limits of life? What forces shape the future of our planet, its people, and their creations? Can we adapt to a dawning range of challenges, from improving energy use, to devising new materials, to understanding the brain and how it affects behavior? The National Science Foundation is proud to be a part of that great effort, and we hope you'll enjoy this series of insights from experts at the frontier of their fields. Now here's a word about this week's presentation.
Few issues loom as ominously over our future as energy use, and few Americans are as superbly qualified to address that issue as Shirley Ann Jackson, president of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, former head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the first African-American woman to receive the National Science Board's Vannevar Bush Award for Lifetime Achievement. In the talk you are about to hear, Jackson argues that we cannot meet tomorrow's energy security needs by relying on our present, rapidly aging science and technology workforce. The need to replenish the nation's inventory of ingenuity, she says, has become a quiet crisis. It can only be addressed by identifying and developing new, homegrown science and engineering talent from all sectors of our society. If that effort does not begin vigorously and soon, she contends, the United States will fall behind other countries for the first time since World War II. That would be a catastrophe because, in Dr. Jackson's view, the search for new energy solutions is the space race of this millennium.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to give one in the series of the 2006-2007 NSF Distinguished Lectures in Mathematical and Physical Sciences. I'm, of course, very honored and very pleased to be here. Now, my remarks today focus on the intertwined challenges of energy security, innovation, and an appropriately prepared workforce. In fact, I had the opportunity to talk about that a little this morning on C-SPAN as part of the Washington Journal program. So I had my moment in the sun. But I begin with this premise, that in an increasingly global environment in which many nations are striving towards self-development, with the concomitant need for energy to fuel these lengthening strides, the United States must respond creatively, strongly, and soon. It is always best, however, to view challenges in a broad context. Now, on its surface, energy availability might seem like a case of supply and demand, simply. As the global appetite for energy has risen, the competition has intensified, each country strategizing on how best to ensure a secure and sufficient supply of energy at reasonable prices. But it is not that simple. Failure to achieve sufficient supply would leave billions stranded in energy poverty, unable to progress, with attendant substandard living conditions, inadequate access to food and water, inability to combat infectious diseases, lack of education, possible civil unrest. But failure in the other direction, overconsumption, following current fossil fuel usage patterns, holds its own implications for major environmental impact. There is an acute urgency to this challenge. From 1950 to 2000, the year 2000, world population rose from 2.5 billion to 6 billion people. Water use tripled, as did grain production. Demand for seafood increased fivefold. Automobiles grew from 53 million in 1950 to 539 million in 2003. And with the introduction of commercial jet aircraft in the late 1950s, air traffic volume mushroomed from about 28 billion passenger kilometers at mid-century to more than 2.9 trillion in 2002. Worldwide energy consumption per capita is now roughly 13 times higher than in pre-industrial times. And bear in mind that there are still 2.4 billion people, over 35% of the world's population, who have no access to modern energy services. But with globalization and media providing greater awareness of the contrast in living standards between the rich and the poor, the have-nots are ever more anxious to better their life prospects and the accoutrements that come with modern lifestyles. If current trends continue, humans will use more energy over the next 50 years than in all of previously recorded history. And where will it come from? From which fuels will it be derived? Can our planet, a planet of limited resources, sustain the impact? Now, so you know that where I'm coming from, many speak of energy independence. But what we must have and what responsible public policy must foster is energy security. There is no energy independence. The energy challenges we face are interrelated, interdependent, and global. Energy security touches nearly every other aspect of societal activity. It influences or is influenced by geopolitics, culture, technological innovation, global trade and financial markets, and workforce needs and trends. Many forecasters predict that in decades to come, problems of water and food scarcity also are likely to loom large. But success in addressing those resource issues will be determined greatly by how we solve or fail to solve the issues of energy security. What is energy security? I define energy security as having an adequate and sustainable supply of energy to meet the needs and aspirations of citizens, commercial enterprises, and public sector functions. The practical definition, that is, the set of strategies for achieving energy security, varies according to nation and to region, but includes the following 5 elements. 1, no overdependence on external suppliers. This entails both maximizing domestic or local production and ensuring reliable sources for necessary fuel imports. 2, diversity of supply. This provides protection against supply disruption events, such as natural disasters or geopolitical instability. It also provides a hedge against fuel price volatility. 3, well-functioning energy markets. This includes ensuring the profitability of fuel production and energy generation for suppliers, as well as mechanisms to secure financing for long-term strategic energy investments. 4, sound infrastructure for energy generation, transmission, and distribution. This includes the necessary regulatory and operational protocols to ensure the safe, secure, and reliable performance of refineries, power plants, national grids, and other energy facilities. 5, environmental sustainability. With the United Nations Security Council holding its first ever debate on climate change last week and concentrating on the risk which climate change could pose to world security, the impact of human energy consumption on the planet is taking center stage as a global concern. This is the nature of energy security. So a narrow focus on U.S. energy interests alone, without regard for the energy interests of other countries, is neither practical nor productive. Because again, global energy markets, global energy supply chains, rising economies, and terrorism have great impact. The more realistic focus must be on redundancy of supply and diversity of source. True economic opportunity and true national energy security are contingent upon energy solutions which can be developed globally and nationally and applied nationally and regionally. And most importantly, they depend upon innovation. So I will consider 4 key challenges to achieving energy security, how the challenges and corresponding solutions differ from region to region, why cooperation between countries, sectors of society, and even disciplines is vital. I then will discuss a few energy sectors where innovation is essential, including, as you might expect, nuclear energy. The 4 key challenges are the global dependency on oil, the industrialization of developing countries, the effect of human energy consumption on the environment, and energy as political currency. The first key challenge is the extraordinary global dependence on oil, which makes up around 36% of the global energy diet, with more than 85 million barrels consumed per day. Oil dominates the transportation sector and is the basis for other primary energy uses as well. As of 2005, oil production had leveled off or declined in 33 of the 48 largest producers, including 6 of the 11 members of OPEC. Coupled with continuing growth in demand, this of course has resulted in a smaller capacity margin. Now I will tell you in the way of full disclosure that I'm actually on the board of an oil and gas company, Marathon Oil. And so I see these things from where they sit, and they have operations all over the world. The result, coupled with geopolitics, has been increased volatility in the price per barrel of oil, which in turn takes a toll on other economic factors. Americans spent 17% more for energy in 2005 than the year before, an increase which accounted for more than 40% of the rise in the U.S. Consumer Index. Now, the European Union relies on imports for 82% of its oil, a figure expected to rise to more than 90% by 2030. Now, whether or not global oil capacity has already passed peak production, which people argue about, one thing is clear. We can no longer just drill our way to energy security. The imbalance in energy consumption and need between rich and poor countries drives the second key challenge. Nearly every aspect of development requires accessible, reliable, affordable energy. As more developing countries industrialize, driven by the desire to improve the lives of their citizens, we can only expect the competition for traditional resources to intensify. And the answer is not that they should not develop. Now, China is a case in point. Last year, its economy grew by 10.7%, with demand for oil up a corresponding 9.3%. For a more concrete image, consider that 30,000 automobiles per month are being added to the streets of Beijing alone. Chinese demand for oil in 2007 is forecast at about 7.6 million barrels per day, more than Germany, France, and the United Kingdom combined. And yet, China lags far behind European per capita consumption. Consider the electricity sector. Last year, China added approximately 60,000 megawatts of new electrical generating capacity to its grid. This year, it expects to add 80,000 megawatts. Or think of it this way. In a single year, China added to its grid roughly the equivalent of the entire electrical generating capacity of France. Now, based on current trends, global primary energy demand will increase by slightly more than 50% by 2030. Fully 70% of that demand increase will come from developing countries, with China alone counting for 30%. What is significant is not only the anticipated demand growth, but that so much of that growth will take place in countries very dependent on fossil fuels. In fact, most of the current increase in Chinese and Indian electrical generating capacity is coming from coal-fired power plants. I have nuclear on the brain. The International Energy Agency projects an increase in coal use, mainly for electricity generation, greater than that of any other energy source. And this leads then to the third key challenge, the expanding human footprint on the Earth. Whether the concern is climate change, air and water pollution, or the extinction of other species, it is clear that the rapid increase in human consumption is taking its toll. For the past 35 years, greenhouse gas emissions have increased at a rate of about 1.6% per year. As of 2003, the United States accounted for 23% of global emissions. Europe, another 24%. From now until 2030, assuming business as usual, carbon dioxide emissions are expected to increase by roughly 55%. Most of that will come from developing countries, accelerated by the proportionately greater use of coal for power generation. Now, because of greenhouse gas emissions, many experts predict a sustained increase in the Earth's temperature, which would in turn cause sea levels to rise, increase the frequency and severity of storms, destroy fragile ecosystems, and lead to heat waves and droughts. But whatever, because I'm a pragmatist, the specific linkage of fossil fuel use to climate change, one fact is indisputable. The natural capacities of the Earth remain the same, whether we're talking water tables or ocean fisheries or the atmosphere itself. Now, with each of these challenges pressuring global energy security, and with more intense competition for resources, also comes greater vulnerability to the use of oil, natural gas, or other resources as political currency, the fourth key challenge. In this way, energy security is relevant not only to economic security, but also to civil security. A country that relies heavily on imports may feel pressure in its stance toward a supplier nation. Supplier countries can use market volatility to political advantage. And if you talk to many oil and gas executives, they will say that more and more it is the above ground risk that is as important as the below ground risk. Of course, an extreme example results from politically motivated violence. And as with overall geopolitical turmoil, acts of violence do lead to volatility in oil or natural gas prices, because violent incidents illustrate the potential for exploiting supply chain vulnerabilities. But perhaps the greatest shift has been the rise of a new group of oil and gas companies. These are state-owned companies from resource-holding or supplier countries and resource-seeking countries, all from outside the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. And these new giants include Saudi Aramco, the largest, which has been around a while, Russia's Gazprom, CNPC of China, the NIOC of Iran, PDVSA of Venezuela, Petrobras of Brazil, and Petronas of Malaysia. These companies control 1/3 of global oil and gas production and more than 1/3 of the reserves, compared with 10% of production and 3% of reserves held by the so-called integrated oil and gas companies that we know about. Global energy markets already are impacted as supplier country-based companies partially regulate the price of oil and gas by controlling production. If they control more of the integrated oil and gas supply chain, which they are in fact looking to do, the effect on global energy markets and economies overall would be more dramatic. Now, these four challenges are global in reach, but each region and country are affected differently based on factors such as indigenous fuel resources, relationships to supplier countries, reliability of infrastructure, economic stability, the degree of attention given to environmental concerns, and how government leaders and the public view the risks and benefits of different energy sources. Variation in how these factors are weighted in the policy-making process of a given country can lead to contrasting strategies for achieving energy security, even though the effect of these policies are likely to extend beyond a given country's own borders. China and India have been successful at sustaining remarkable growth in energy generating capacity and asset in raising living standards and national productivity. Yet the trade-off has been that both countries are struggling to manage the environmental impacts of their growth, with the heavy dependency on coal for power generation taking its toll. China is home to 16 of the world's 20 most polluted cities and is estimated to suffer roughly 400,000 premature deaths per year from air pollution. Nor does the effect stop at the border. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency reports that about 30% of the background sulfate particulate matter in the western U.S. originates in Asia. Europe faces its own mix of energy challenges. In January, the European Commission released a paper entitled An Energy Policy for Europe. The Commission called for urgent action on energy sustainability, security of supply, and competitiveness. So we're not the only ones talking about this. The EU relies heavily on imported hydrocarbons. These imports today account for 50% of the total EU consumption. This is hydrocarbons overall. And if no changes are made, this dependency is expected to increase to 65% by 2030. This places great strategic importance on their maintaining effective relationships with gas suppliers such as Norway, which is inside the European Economic Area, and Russia and Algeria, which are not. Still, the vulnerability is high for EU member states that are fully or almost fully reliant on a single hydrocarbon supplier. On the positive side, the EU has committed itself to lead in reducing greenhouse gas emissions to offset air pollution and possible climate change. The Commission has proposed a legally binding target that would increase the level of renewable energy from 7% in the current overall EU energy mix to 20% by 2020. The EU already is the world leader in renewable energy technologies. For example, EU companies hold about 60% of the world market in wind technology. But what is encouraging about the European energy security climate is the focus on developing a coherent energy policy. And there are many discussions across the board. But in some ways, the current EU discussions on energy security are a smaller version of a discussion that must take place on a global scale. If the European Union can successfully balance competing concerns, achieving security of supply, reducing carbon emissions, convincing consumers to adopt more energy-efficient practices while remaining economically competitive, it lends hope that cooperation can take place on a broader scale worldwide. An objective of the EU energy policy paper was to transform the region into a cost-effective, low-carbon emission energy economy. This call for a new energy industrial revolution, as it is called, echoes the call for technological innovation that many in the US also are urging. It is a goal that I have heard emphasized repeatedly in boardrooms and research centers, not only in the US, but also in my recent trips to Mumbai, Beijing, and Tokyo. A new energy industrial revolution will require the participation of all sectors, from the governments who sponsor legislation and consumer incentives, to the universities, research centers, and private companies that will drive the innovation. Many of the priorities listed by the Commission will require innovative research and development covering a wide range, including second-generation biofuels and the science that undergirds it, more energy-efficient buildings, appliances, industrial processes, and transport systems, and the technology that undergirds them, cost-competitive photovoltaics and offshore wind farms, fourth-generation nuclear reactors with enhanced economic, safety, security, and waste disposal features, carbon capture and storage and recycling technologies to make coal and gas energy sustainable. Now, time does not permit me to address all of the areas ripe for innovation, but I will discuss briefly a few. Now, in my view, few areas of needed innovation deserve higher priority than clean coal research. While some countries are endeavoring to minimize coal use, the global picture makes this unavoidable. Coal supplies 25% of the world's primary energy needs and generates 40% of its electricity. Because coal remains abundant, the use of coal, including the less clean brown coal or lignite, is increasing. If innovation can reduce significantly the environmental impact of coal-based energy generation, it should be pursued. The US is working on a project called FutureGen, a public-private collaborative venture to construct a 275 megawatt zero emissions plant that will produce both electricity and hydrogen from coal while capturing and storing the carbon dioxide. Ask me about carbon sequestration at the end. India, South Korea, and China have signed on as partners as well. If in addition, and this is really the point about carbon sequestration, if the carbon dioxide could be converted through technology or processing to other forms or to elemental carbon for its reuse, there would be strong advantages to such a nearly closed cycle approach. A second area involves marine research for deep gas hydrate exploration. In hydrates, as you probably know, methane, the chief constituent of natural gas, is locked in ice and generally is found in hostile remote settings, such as the Arctic permafrost or the deep ocean. Once considered a nuisance because it clogs natural gas pipelines, methane hydrate's reputation has improved as scientists have discovered that it could be a remarkably abundant new energy source. Worldwide estimates of the natural gas potential of methane hydrates approach 400 million trillion cubic feet, an astonishing figure when the world's currently proven gas reserves stand at 5,500 trillion cubic feet. In fact, the worldwide amounts of hydrocarbons bound in gas hydrates are estimated conservatively to be twice the amount found in all known fossil fuels on the Earth. But the technology to mine these deposits has proven elusive. Gas hydrate drilling comes with its own share of environmental concerns. including fears that drilling could release greenhouse gases or trigger ocean landslides. Traditional proposals for recovering gas from hydrates usually involve dissociating or melting the substances on site. Companies are exploring ways to produce and to ship stable slurries of natural gas hydrate crystals. There are also advanced drilling techniques and so-called down-hole completions that are complex that are being considered. But if even a small percentage of the methane hydrate resource could be made technologically and economically recoverable in an environmentally sound manner, the rewards might be great indeed. Now, it turns out that multinational cooperation is occurring in this arena. In fact, in spite of a lot of the focus on nuclear cooperation, a part of the recently signed energy cooperation agreement between the U.S. and India involves deep sea exploration and research with respect to methane hydrate extraction and use. Now let's talk about good old petroleum fuel for a moment. Currently, for every gallon of petroleum-based fuel discovered, 2 gallons are consumed, and estimates differ about the extent of remaining petroleum reserves. But it is certain that as time progresses, remaining reserves will be in increasingly less accessible locations. Less certain is how much it will cost to extract and deliver these fuels to users. Successful innovation will be an important factor. A good example of how multidisciplinary collaborative innovation can support the drive to greater energy security is in nanotechnology, which, as you know, is a cutting-edge science and technology that has beneficial applications in many sectors. In the present context, I would simply point out that nanotechnology research offers an array of possibilities relevant to the petroleum industry. For example, improved elastomers critical to deep drilling to improve high temperature and high pressure performance. Nanosensors for improved temperature and pressure ratings in very deep wells and in unfamiliar or hostile environments. And nanoparticulate wetting carried out using molecular dynamics simulations that show promise in the creation of solvents for heterogeneous surfaces and porous solvents. There are many more examples with direct relevance to the exploration, extraction, and transportation of petroleum fuels, including the use of other smart materials and advanced imaging techniques. But the point here is that multidisciplinary, multi-sector, multinational cooperation is critical to bring such innovations to fruition. There's much more that can be said about innovative technological development to enhance energy security across a broad front. And as you know, research is proceeding apace in fuel cells, biofuels, solid-state lighting, smart building design, intelligent grid operation, and in wind, solar, and wave technologies. But with rising fossil fuel prices and global climate change concerns, there's been a gradual but steady resurgence of interest in nuclear power. And last month, as you probably know, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, approved the first nuclear power plant site in more than 30 years in central Illinois. And more approvals of early site permits are anticipated. Now, on its surface, nuclear energy satisfies many of the optimum requirements for enhancing energy security. Nuclear power produces virtually no sulfur dioxide, particulates, nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, or greenhouse gases. The complete cycle from resource extraction to waste disposal emits only about 2 to 6 grams of carbon equivalent per kilowatt hour. This is about the same as wind and solar if one includes construction and component manufacturing, and is roughly 2 orders of magnitude below coal, oil, and natural gas. Unlike small wind and solar facilities, nuclear power can supply the large baseload capacity to support large urban centers and to stabilize large electrical grids. One of the most controversial aspects of nuclear power, of course, is the management and disposal of spent fuel. The amount of spent nuclear fuel produced annually about 2,000 tons per year in the US, or about 10,000 tons globally, is actually small when contrasted with the 25 billion tons of carbon waste from fossil fuels, which is released directly many times into the atmosphere. Most of the technological issues associated with geologic disposal of high-level radioactive waste already are well studied, and some would say solved. But given the intense polarization around the nuclear waste issue, public opinion will likely remain skeptical until waste repository or other fuel cycle closure solutions have been demonstrated. The federal government has made progress in some ways toward licensing and building a nuclear waste repository at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. And last month, as you probably know, U.S. Secretary of Energy Sam Bodman sent to the Congress proposed legislation on the disposal of spent fuel and high-level nuclear waste, legislation to facilitate licensing and construction at Yucca Mountain. And as proposed, it would increase the capacity of Yucca Mountain by eliminating the current 70,000 metric ton cap on the amount of fuel to be disposed of there, and would help with the safe isolation of spent fuel from license extension of existing reactors. The proposed legislation provides for initiation of infrastructure activities as well as for more streamlined NRC licensing. However, even if it started today, it would still be more than a decade before the first such facility is operational. In the meantime, the trend has been to construct and use above-ground interim storage facilities, with many countries exploring the feasibility of interim storage for about 100 years or more. Now R&D is progressing on the use of fast reactors and accelerator-driven systems to incinerate and transmute long-lived waste in order to reduce the volume and radiotoxicity of waste to be sent to geologic repositories. Of course, as well, nuclear power must be contained and maintained within a non-proliferation context. But here, too, technological innovation offers tremendous potential and is critical even today. Advanced technologies in areas such as satellite monitoring and nuclear forensics play a critical role. Innovation in screening technologies, proliferation-resistant reactor and fuel cycle systems, domestic nuclear detection technologies, passive safety systems, and sophisticated support infrastructure offer new safeguards which were not in place 20 years ago. This is an area, however, which demands continual innovation and advancement to stay ahead of the game. It is important to interject a word here about the broad nature and utility of technological innovation. Innovation is most often incorporated into discussions of national competitiveness. Our national capacity for innovation is critical because it enables us to lead and to compete. And it is critical because it offers solutions to the larger and more complex challenges, which in the end that are global challenges, which can threaten our own national security and global security as well. But the capacity to innovate rests solely upon a skilled human workforce. As many of you know, this vital, valuable workforce is threatened here in the United States. The current cohort of scientists and engineers are beginning to retire, many of whom came of age in the post-Sputnik era. And as I've said before, I'm one of those who came of age, but I'm pretty well preserved. Now, at the same time, however, we are no longer producing sufficient numbers of new graduates to replace them. And remember, the discussion is not about just matching a given graduate to a given job. It is about capacity for innovation. Now, the rate of growth of talented international scientists and engineers and graduate students coming to the U.S. really has slowed. It was a decline over a decade. And the number today is still down 27% since 2003. Of course, there was an accelerated, exacerbating effect in the post-9/11 environment. But the real message is that other nations are investing in their own education and research enterprises, offering new opportunities for their citizens to study and work at home. The flattening world means that they also can work elsewhere and not necessarily in the United States. Our own demographics have shifted, and our new majority now comprises young women and the racial and ethnic groups which traditionally have been underrepresented in our science and engineering schools. We also must look to this group as well for future scientists and engineers. I have called these trends, coupled with the underinvestment in basic research across a broad disciplinary front, particularly in the last decade in the physical sciences, mathematics, and engineering, the convergence, the quiet crisis. It is quiet because it takes decades, as you well know, to educate a biomolecular researcher or a nuclear engineer. So the true impact unfolds only gradually over time. It is a crisis because our innovative capacity rests solely upon their talents. The quiet crisis is a major challenge to our entire education system, to reach out to the underrepresented majority, to inspire and encourage them and to help them stay in the pipeline. But this must occur against the backdrop of encouraging all, and I do mean all, of our young people to take on the challenge of science and advanced mathematics in primary and secondary school, and to consider science, engineering, and related majors in college and beyond. Our paramount mission must be to educate all of our students through high school and into the university to graduation and on as appropriate to doctoral and professional study in these fields. Now, reports by major corporate, academic, government, and private sector entities all have recognized these trends and warn of the consequences if we fail to act. Now, 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to participate in the National Academies Committee, which produced the landmark report, Rising Above the Gathering Storm, Energizing and Employing America for a Brighter Economic Future, which recommended federal policy changes in K-12 education, in higher education, in research and economic policy. There was a concomitant effort by the Council on Competitiveness with its National Innovation Initiative that was heavily supported by the corporate sector. Now, the Rising Above the Gathering Storm report urged 4 sweeping national policy actions. 1, to increase the United States talent pool by improving K-12 science and mathematics education. 2, to strengthen the nation's commitment to long-term basic research to maintain the flow of new ideas. 3, to make the U.S. the most attractive setting in which to study and conduct research, and to develop, recruit, and retain the best and the brightest, domestically and from abroad. And 4, to enact policies to make the U.S. the premier place to innovate, investing in a variety of activities and measures. Now, as much as any similar report prior or since that one, this report, the RAGS report, as Andy likes to call it, Rags to Riches, has garnered widespread media and leadership attention. The report also engaged the national conversation, which I have been speaking to for some time. Some of these recommendations, as you may know, are captured in legislation, which both the U.S. House and Senate are debating this week. The various pieces of legislation are designed to increase investment in basic research, doubling your budget in the process, and to strengthen educational opportunities in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The It is called the America Competes Act in the Senate, and it has different names in the House. The real message, however, is that it really is time to move from proposals to action. All Americans, I believe, must be more involved in the processes of our government, particularly on in these areas. But I urge you in government to support these efforts, and in your own way, not just through the agency, to urge Congress to move innovation and competitiveness from rhetoric to reality. Moving beyond the political process, however, how then are we to educate our young people to meet the challenges that I've outlined, to innovative leadership within the global environment of the 21st century? How do we educate our students to a global view and the motivation and capability to work toward global security, including global energy security? And since I'm the president of a university, how might institutions of higher education refocus to address both national and global challenges? Well, in every discipline, I believe, we must graduate young people with strong analytical skills, of course, who can understand and solve complex problems. Individuals with multicultural understanding, who have a global view and who can operate in a global context. And individuals with intellectual agility, who can see connections between disciplines and between sectors across a broad intellectual milieu. This means we must do a better job of teaching our students and ourselves how to be critical analyzers and consumers of information, because information as an enabler has sweeping implications. We must continue to educate our students to the fundamentals of a discipline, but with the ability to work between disciplines, to work with others to do that, to find innovative new approaches, and to value the perspectives of diversity in reaching solutions. We must evaluate pedagogical approaches and learning styles. We must understand cognition patterns and organize pedagogy to enable students to use their skills and perspectives in yet more creative ways. Information technology is a tool which can take us beyond classroom walls, offering students the interactive experiential learning to which they are habituated in ways which enhance their cognition, their analytical abilities, and their specific knowledge. Simulation of physical phenomena, game study technologies, telepresence and teleimmersion, all are pedagogical tools which can help. Our undergraduate students at that level need to be involved in study abroad, offering them an expanded world vision, multicultural exposure, and preparing them for collaborative research and work, and for global leadership. Education must be cognizant that 21st century challenges are not born of a single issue. They are complex, interlinked, often multilateral. They may involve a science or engineering problem, but they may have a medical component, an international law facet, a diplomacy or geopolitical aspect, an ethical challenge. Now, what we are really speaking of here is a diversity-enhanced education with diversity of approach, whereby students acquire grounding in disciplinary fundamentals combined with the ability to work across multiple disciplines and sectors. Diversity of pedagogy, whereby education is enhanced and expanded through the utilization of a variety of new media and tools and knowledge of cognition patterns which enlarge learning opportunities. Diversity of outlook, where students, through an international experience, are exposed to diverse cultures with associated differences in thought, approach, lifestyle and practice, and diversity in fact, whereby all of our young people, including the new majority of diverse ethnicities and backgrounds, and groups underrepresented in science, engineering, mathematics, and technology, are encouraged and inspired to education at the highest levels. We ask a lot of our young people, although sometimes I think we do not ask enough, because as they assume the reins of leadership, they will be called upon to find the political and diplomatic solutions for global challenges, but they also must find the technological solutions, the innovations, the discoveries upon which turn the rebalancing of the asymmetries of today's world. All of the great challenges which the world faces, including human health, the environment, clean water, food production, will require innovation and collaborative research. Energy security is perhaps the greatest at this time, and it confronts every nation. We must innovate to provide diverse alternative energy sources, innovate to conserve, and innovate to develop new extraction, use, and transportation technologies. Global research partnerships in a multi-sector, multinational framework can provide multidisciplinary approaches to the resolution of these challenges. Collaboration will enable us to innovate at an unprecedented pace. And living on a shared planet of limited resources, that pace is essential. And so this is about leadership, an odyssey of thought, because the urgency of energy security and other challenges impel us, all of us, to engagement and to leadership. Leadership to tackle the innovations which will assure our national security, global energy security, and a global future. Leadership to resolve the quiet crisis, to assure that we tap the complete talent pool, that all young people have a sound understanding of science, that they are inspired and encouraged to take challenging subjects early, and that we instill in them the excitement and the hope of science and our belief that they can do it. Leadership to assure that young people have the kind of education which addresses global leadership and the function of science in policy issues. Leadership to base public policies on sound science, and leadership toward a cultural shift to value science and those who do it. This is required of all of us, elected leaders, government officials, academic leaders, scientists, engineers, of course. But the leadership odyssey extends to each of us within his or her own sphere of influence. In the end, the world and its very future looks to each of us to build the kind of human society that we treasure. Thank you very much.